Hold on tight for the next hour. You're entering into a place, a zone called the alternative to the alternative media. It's a place, a special place where even truth seekers fear to tread.
All right, people, let's move like we've got a purpose.
Affirmative.
Okay, glad you're back on the Investigative Journal on this Monday, the first day of the week, another week before us here in August, on August 14th, 2017, day on our calendar. And just wanted to say, go to my website at arcticbeacon.com. It'll take you to a new blog site I have called Greg Anthony's Journal. And you will find some interesting stuff on there. Also, hit that donate button because all month we're running a donation drive. Really appreciate it. Want to keep the show on the air. And I want to get right to things today. I think over the years, I've pretty well covered the Lincoln assassination. And I think I've covered it from so many different angles and tried to give you everything possible so that you can make a decision for yourself. And beyond a reasonable doubt, the story that the government has given us over the years is that a lone gunman, John Wilkes Booth, killed the president in Ford Theater. Now, the evidence that I presented over the years through people's books, all the old books we've read, even checking out certain priests who were very close to Lincoln and his papers that were uncovered in Canada. Beyond a reasonable doubt, that government story is a lie. It's a fabrication. And still to this day, 90% of America, maybe more, don't believe what we bring to you, the facts. They prefer to believe a concocted government story. And I think just to feel good, like our government couldn't be that way. The Jesuits and the Vatican couldn't do that. Well, yes, they could. Now, what I found over the years when you start researching the main assassinations, and I'm talking about Lincoln, several presidents along the way, then you get to JFK, they do the same thing. They create a narrative, and then the cover-up begins, and they stick to their lone gunman story, just as they did with Lee Harvey Oswald. Now, if you look, the lone gunman is always used, and they stick, for example, in 9/11. They stuck to their story of these Arab hijackers. That was proven by so many people over the years. In the last 14 years, it's impossible, but still 90% of Americans believe it. And the theory is this is what they do. They've already got the story created, and then they lay it out to you, and they stick to their guns. They don't change it, no matter what people say. They do it all the time. So since we've covered Lincoln pretty well, let's move on to JFK. Now, over the years, I've had so many different people on my show giving every possible angle of what really happened on that day in Dallas. And I've covered it from points where we've had Jim Rothstein on, and he basically interviewed Frank Sturgis, and we got the story of how the mob was involved, and they had a number of assassins. Great story, a lot of it factually true. Then we've had all the way to people who've come on my show and say JFK's still alive. So there are so many theories out there. On November 22nd, 1963, this is what I'm going to present to you. Now, this is another video that just was done. It's called JFK 9/11, A Rich Man's Game. And he purports to say that all of the conspiracy theories that have been out there are not all factually true, that this one is the one. Now, it's true that what the CIA will do, and the government, they'll put out a story. They'll throw you a story about what happened to JFK, what happened to Lincoln, what happened to this guy, what happened, just so that you follow the wrong horse down the track, right? So he's right on that. But let me read. I had someone send me this who I trust, and she wanted me to present it, and I am presenting it to you to add one more log on the fire of the JFK assassination. Now, on November 22nd, this is what this video will say, 1963, 8 assassins were paid $50,000 each to assure our leader of the free world, JFK, would never survive another day. The meeting the day prior to the plan and the participants who wanted him dead would surprise you. All conspiracy theories in recent books still don't get to the full truth, as they were also many paid by the CIA, since the original patsy, Lee Harvey Oswald's story, is proven not to even be possible. Now that we know. This is the true story, he says, an explanation to what really took place that day. It's disturbing, embarrassing, and hurtful to our nation. Who planned his assassination? They did it for money, for power, and different political ambitions. This is not a monetized brief encounter to JFK murders, explained from the film that is over 3 hours long. You might want to get it. You can get it easily on the internet. JFK, 9/11, A Rich Man's Game. I shortened it now to the point of the JFK murders and explain why other conspiracy theories are not true as well. And this is the truth you've been looking for, this video says. So to add one more log to the fire, like I said, I've shortened it down to the hour and 25 minutes. And we're going to play it in the next couple days. And we're going to start right now. So let me get right to it here. I'm going to put it on for you. And let's see what this man has to offer, right? And I'm potting it up right now in that little circle, that world circle. It just keeps spinning around and around. It's like my life. Just keeps spinning. Spinning out of control. Here we go.
In the immediate aftermath of the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, the American government came to the conclusion that a lone gunman had changed the course of human history by killing the most powerful man in the world with 3 rifle shots fired from the elevated window of an office building. And for half a century, they have stuck rigidly to this fabrication, while critics, scientists, playwrights, and poets have produced books and essays and films to prove beyond any shadow of a doubt that this version of our Western history is a physical impossibility. Over and over again, we have been told that this man did it by himself. He didn't have any help, and he did it because he was a lonely madman and a communist to boot. We are also meant to believe that there is nothing remotely suspicious in his being shot on live television in a basement full of police officers before he had a chance to tell his side of the story. So there is quite clearly no need to investigate further. Of course, every thinking person knows.
Okay. Get a little problem.
It is absolute nonsense. And being nonsensical, it naturally leads thinking to ask some very important questions like, why did the American government come up with such a lame and improbable scenario to account for what had happened? And then why did they stick with it so dogmatically for so many years afterwards? Exactly what and who are they protecting? And how can it be that even such venerable institutions as the BBC have played along with this charade in the intervening decades? We now know that there were actually 8 riflemen firing at the president on that day. We know where they were located in Dealey Plaza, and we know their names. However, those with sharp eyes will already be asking themselves why we are only showing the location of 6 assassins in this schematic. We're doing this because any casual onlooker who happened to be in Dealey Plaza at 12:29 on November 22nd, 1963, might well have caught sight of these 6. Many people did. Witnesses like Arnold Rowland, Richard Randolph Carr, Lee Bowers, Amos Hewins, Mary Mormon, they all gave precise descriptions of men they observed in the windows of the book depository and on the famous grassy knoll. But none of them observed 2 of the riflemen who shot at the president. No one did. And the reason why no one did is itself the key to the mystery. A mystery which begins with a very simple question. Supposing you wanted to shoot at a man on a barren, empty street without anybody seeing you, where could you possibly hide? However, the riflemen who took part in the assassination were not as important to an understanding of what the Kennedy assassination was really all about, as were a group of 20 men who had gathered together the night before at the home of Dallas oil millionaire Clint Murchison. These men were a much more important part of the story than the assassins themselves, because they hired the 8 snipers and paid them. We even know how much they paid them. So who were these men? What brought them together to orchestrate such a foul and despicable deed? Why did they, and more importantly those who came after them, cover up the crime with such ruthless brutality for so long afterwards? And how can it be that these men and what they stood for has left an indelible legacy which still influences our daily lives right up to the present day? These were J. Edgar Hoover and his homosexual lover Clyde Tolson, who stood to lose the millions they'd invested in their host's oil business if Kennedy lived. Hoover also knew Kennedy wanted to replace him as head of the FBI. The 2 Brown brothers of Brown Brothers Harriman, who along with Cliff Carter, John Connolly, and Senator Joseph Yarborough stood to lose millions from lost defense contracts because they knew JFK wanted to end the Vietnam War. Also present were Joseph Sevilla, head of the Mafia in Dallas, and the mayor of Dallas, Earl Cable, the CIA men who knew the president was serious about smashing the Central Intelligence Agency because he'd already fired Cable's brother, Charles. Having a drink with them was Chase Manhattan Bank Chief John McCloy, a confirmed Nazi who had shared a box with Hitler at the 1936 Berlin Olympic Games, and Mafia chieftain Carlos Marcello, who felt nicely at home rubbing shoulders with Sam Giancana's representatives Jack Ruby, Richard Nixon, and Haroldson Lafayette Hunt. The media were represented by Eamon G. Carter, and the only one who might have felt a little out of place as he awaited his boss was the world-class marksman and serial killer Malcolm Wallace. Late in the evening, Lyndon Baines Johnson finally turned up and briefly went into the party. When he came out to greet Madeleine Brown, she said he was euphoric.
Let's go back to that before, when Johnson came out of the meeting, what did he say to you?
He was so angry. He had a violent temper when he was upset.
Well, let's use the exact words that he said to you. What did he say to you?
He grabbed me by the arm, and he had this deep voice, and he said, "After tomorrow, those SOBs will never embarrass me again. That's no threat. That's a promise."
Johnson had clearly been told by the people in that room that everything was ready. The next morning, the president landed at Love Field and was led to his car by Governor John Connolly. As he is driven away, it is immediately apparent that something is wrong. A Secret Service agent, Henry J. Rickber, tries to take up his proper position on the president's limousine, holding on to these handles provided for the purpose, and is ordered to stand down by Emory Roberts. Let's just look at Rickber's reaction again. He is quite clearly disgusted. Why aren't they letting him do his job? And as the car glides into Dallas, we can now see how the removal of his Secret Service protection has opened the president up to a field of fire from almost any direction. It's plain from these pictures that as the motorcade moved on into Dallas, the Secret Service, meant to protect the president, remained crowded together on the vehicle behind. While travelling in the pilot car some 400 yards ahead, 3 men are smiling as they see everything is going to plan. Crichton, Lumpkin, and Whitmire have used their influence to remove the military protection which should have been amongst the crowd. And whilst the people lining the parade route are 10 deep in places, Lumpkin has seen to it the police have let almost no one into the would-be crime scene. Pausing at the corner of Houston and Elm, Lumpkin is seen exchanging reassurances with one of his men. Yes, he tells him, the hit is on. Glancing discreetly upwards, he sees Weatherford and the best Cuban sniper, Eladio del Valle, preparing to fire. The signal is passed to the other snipers to get into position. Having been let into the Daltex building by oil baron Haroldson Hunt, Eugene Hale Brading unlocks the second-floor broom closet. A client of New Orleans lawyer G. Ray Gill, who also represents mafia boss Carlos Marcello, Brading has a getaway pilot waiting, whom Gill employs as a private detective, David Ferry. He opens the window, and as Charles Nicoletti loads his rifle, Richard Kane listens to his radio. Car coming. Get ready. Closing the door, Milwaukee Phil Aldericio guards the corridor with two Cubans, Rolando Mesferrer and Rolando Otero. This basic pattern was established all over the plaza. A sniper next to a radio man, alongside a second marksman who could take over should the first one to back out at the last moment. Each team was then guarded by more assassins, mainly Cubans, who made sure no one interfered with each group. It all sounds quite professional, and the truth is, it was. Sam Giancarlo's spy in the Chicago police force, Richard Kane, was an electronics and wiretapping expert who spoke 5 languages. Up on the grassy knoll, with his childhood friend Charles Harrison, stood the diminutive Charles Frederick Rogers, a nuclear physicist who worked in seismology for Shell Oil. He was also friends with David Ferry in the Civil Air Patrol. Up in the Texas School Book Depository, LBJ's psychotic hitman Malcolm Wallace held a PhD and taught at the University of Texas. The Texas oilmen, mafia dons, merchant bankers and military industrialists had assembled the all-time dream team of professional killers. They were there to make absolutely certain their king died, and the 2 men who in later years would steal his crown, Richard Milhouse Nixon and George Herbert Walker Bush, smiled from the sidewalk as they exchanged winks with Jack Crichton. There was no way Kennedy could escape now, and they knew it. Arranging his sniper's nest at the other end of the 6th floor, Sturgis was the first to be spotted by Arnold Rowland.
I just looking around and we noticed a man up in the window, and I remarked to my wife, tried to point him out, and remarked that he must be a security guard, Secret Service agent.
Well, the window then that you're referring to is on the opposite end of the building from where the main entrance to the building is.
Yes, it is on the other side of the building. And he had a rifle. It looked like a high-powered rifle because it had a scope which looked in relation to the size of the rifle to be a big scope.
A moment later, 15-year-old Amos Ewins caught sight of one of the Sturgis-trained Cubans, Ignacio Novo Sampol. Even more significantly, Richard Randolph Carr, a steel construction worker who was looking for a job in the new Dallas courthouse, which was then under construction, stared out from his 7th floor vantage point and saw Malcolm Wallace taking position to fire. Testifying at the trial of Clay Shaw, he gave a minutely detailed description of a very heavy-set man in a sports jacket who wore large framed glasses. He could see the man so clearly, he even said his eyeglasses had large earpieces. America, the home of the brave and the land of the free, was about to discover that it wasn't what it thought it was. As the president's car made the turn onto Houston, government agents who had sworn an oath to uphold their country's democratic principles waited alongside mafia killers to murder their own commander-in-chief. One of the men they were working for, Sam Giancarlo, said this proved that in reality there was no such thing as white hats and black hats. That notion, he said, was just a sham for saps to cling to.
The one thing I recognized was there are no black hats and there are no white hats. They all conduct themselves the exact same. And very good evidence of that is that the CIA would hire 2 so-called mafia men, Sam Giancarlo and John Roselli, to assassinate Fidel Castro. If there's such a difference, you're not supposed to have anything to do with each other. But in essence, the remark is really they're all in bed together. They all do business together.
It was now that Abraham Zapruder pressed the trigger on his 8mm cine camera. Ever since that moment, the world has accepted that what he recorded was the definitive account of what really happened. What people must appreciate is that what they have just seen is not at all what really happened. Had you actually been there on the day, this is what you would have seen. And doesn't that look a great deal more suspicious? So just exactly what did happen during the 10 seconds Zapruder was filming. To begin with, Dulles, Lansdale and Atlee Phillips had tried to get over the problem of volley fire, blowing the president's head clean off by firing in 4 stages. Stage 1 was meant to be a single shot by Charles Nicoletti into the back of Kennedy's head from the Daltex building some 40 yards behind. Had he succeeded, the plotters would have had the single assassin with 1 bullet story they wanted. But in his excitement, the mafia assassin squeezed the trigger too soon. His bullet ricocheted off the hard chrome sill of the limo's back seat and struck the curb beneath the overpass, sending up a sharp piece of concrete which scratched James Tague's face. Watch again. We clearly see how this little girl stops running, and her gaze looks directly at where the shot originated and not up at the 6th floor of the depository. It was now that Umbrella Man took over. Standing right at the curbside, it was his job, should the first shot miss, to give a clear visual signal. Target is not injured. The intelligence chiefs knew that if this situation occurred, Kennedy would now be moving rapidly away from the first sniper. They knew the only way to make sure of getting him was to fusillade the car. So a moment later, 2 rifles tried to fire from directly in front at exactly the same time to deceive witnesses into thinking there was only 1 shot.
You said you'd killed President Kennedy.
At the same time I said I had killed the judge, I said I had killed Kennedy. Well, do you believe Lee Harvey Oswald killed President Kennedy? We'll get back to that. Alone, without any aid from a rogue agency of the U.S. government, or at least a portion of that agency. I believe you're very naive if you do.
Harrelson's bullet hit JFK in the throat, and another gunman, hiding in a culvert 50 yards away, up in the embankment of the overpass, made the hole in the windscreen, which was later seen by Dr. Evalier Glanges.
Presidential limousine was there. Had been standing there for some time just watching the back of the emergency room. Talked to my friend next to me and said, "Look, there's a bullet hole in the windshield," and pointed it out to them. But it was very clear it was a through and through bullet hole through the windshield of the car from the front to the back.
As Kennedy emerges from behind the road sign, his distress is clear, while Governor Connolly remains composed. This single frame of the Zapruder film makes nonsense of the single bullet theory, because it's quite clear both men have not been struck at the same time. Kennedy has now passed through 2 layers of fire and has not been hit in the head. To cover this eventuality, the assassins were given a simple instruction.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break. Come back and we're going to finish the first part of this up anyway. Quite interesting. Back in 3 minutes on the Investigative Journal.
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on Internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the Internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org. When it comes to prophecy today, much of the evangelical Christian world has their eyes on Israel, waiting and watching to see when the third temple will begin to be built. The plans are drawn. The Jewish people are eager. Most evangelical Christians today believe that the rapture will happen before the third temple is built. Hi, I'm Michael Eugene. I was taught that Daniel's 70th week was in the future. Is that really what the Bible teaches? Have we searched the Scriptures and found this to be true? Why is it so important for a re-established Israel to build a third temple in Jerusalem? Is it necessary to build a temple on the same location already occupied by the Dome of the Rock? Is it necessary for sacrifices to take place in the temple on Temple Mount? Is there really a rapture followed by 7 years of tribulation? What is the New Testament temple? Can we identify history and prophecy? Who is the first beast in Revelation chapter 13? Who are the 7 kings in Revelation 17? I have asked all these questions, and I have found Nicholas Arthur's new book, When the Third Temple is Built, answers all these questions and more using Scripture to interpret Scripture. The Bible says that no prophecy of Scripture is of any private interpretation. Nicholas shows us in his new book, When the Third Temple is Built, how the Bible interprets prophecy and not man's private interpretation. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of Nicholas Arthur's new book titled When the Third Temple is Built. That's crosstheborder.org.
The following program is labeled dangerous and off limits by the supreme Jesuit command. But stand tall, people. Listen up, and you may just learn something.
Oh, dear Lord Jesus, this ain't happening, man. This can't be happening, man. This ain't happening.
Okay, back for the second half hour on this Monday, August 14th, 2017 day on our calendar. One thing before I get back to this presentation. Years ago, I interviewed a New York police detective by the name of Jim Rothstein. And during one of the interviews, he had mentioned the name Frank Sturgis. We just heard this man's account that Sturgis was in that Texas Depository building, but at the other end of the building. Witness had seen him there. Now, Sturgis had confessed to Rothstein when he had arrested him on a possible assassination attempt of one of the hit team members who they were fearing was going to speak. Not one of the hit team members that was actually one of the gunmen, but a woman who was paid, along with a number of men, to come to Dallas. And she was part of the team to protect the hitmen. And she was going to sing, maybe, and she was in New York at the time, and Jim Rothstein and his partner Manny Rosenthal got a tip that Sturgis was going to kill this woman. So they staked out her apartment. When Sturgis arrived, they arrested him, took him down to have him booked. Sturgis kind of laughed at Rothstein and said, "Yeah, I killed Kennedy, but who cares? Nobody's going to believe you or anybody. I was there." He got his one phone call. Guess who he called? He called the White House. And within 15 minutes, Sturgis walked out. Tells you something, doesn't it? Let's get back to this.
Fusillade the car with everything. So that in the next few moments, the 5 remaining riflemen fired, causing the Secret Service agent riding in the front passenger seat, Roy Kellerman, to report a feeling like a jet sonic boom as the hail of bullets whistled into the car. It is now more than 3 seconds after Kennedy is hit in the throat that Frank Sturgis misses his target altogether and blows out 5 inches of Governor Connolly's ribs, compressing his lungs and puffing his cheeks, with a bullet which quite clearly struck at far too steep an angle to come from the other end of the depository. In almost the same instant, Eladio Del Valle hit the governor in the wrist, Weatherford fired into his thigh, and Nicoletti's second shot hit the chrome frame of the window. A moment later, the best marksman, Malcolm Wallace, shot Kennedy in his upper back, the bullet strike witnessed and recorded by all the Secret Service men in the following car. Jackie Kennedy starts looking concerned, and yet even now there are no obvious signs that her husband, held upright by his back brace, has been shot twice. The assassins have so far failed to hit him in the head, and it is now that they play the ace up their sleeve. Here we can finally answer the riddle of where on an empty street you can hide a man with a rifle, and how he can manage to shoot a man speeding past him in a limousine. The answer is that he can't, and that is why the driver, William Greer, looked around twice to see whether Kennedy had been hit in the head, and when he saw he hadn't, as dozens of witnesses, including police officers, confirmed, he stopped the car completely.
His orders was to slow down where they arrest the guys.
This is Greer, the driver of the presidential limousine.
Yeah, presidential limousine. Slow down almost to a stop.
It is now that most people have been led to believe that Kennedy was shot in the head by Charles Boyd Harrelson, the sniper standing on the grassy knoll. This is not true, because if we look at the angle of elevation of a shot from that area, it's obvious that a shot originating from above and right would have pushed Kennedy's head down and left, whereas it's quite clear that his head is knocked upwards and to the left by the impact. So where did that bullet come from? Incredibly, the answer has lain hidden in the most well-known and iconic image from the assassination of the motorcycle policeman heaving his bike onto its stand. Look now as we freeze frame him here. This is the moment when the whole world was looking up the hill toward the man who had fired from the grassy knoll, but that is not where the police officer is looking. He is looking down into the storm drain, because that is where that shot at the stationary car came from. The shot which all of the well-known assassination witnesses described as coming from behind the picket fence missed completely and ripped up the grass at Jean Hill's feet. She did not even notice, but we know this is true because the FBI told her so. So who were the men who fired unseen from the storm drains on Elm Street? One thing we know is that they were very young and had to be brought into the conspiracy because they had to crawl into a filthy, smelly sewer, something which the older, experienced mafia assassins would never have dreamed of doing. They were basically 2 kids looking for excitement. The first was Curtis Laverne Crayford, also known as Larry Crayford. Formerly CIA, he had worked for Ruby at the Carousel Club, and Ruby had told everyone his name was Lee Harvey Oswald until Lee Harvey Oswald walked in. But while above ground, the world was taking pictures and running and screaming and trying to figure out what had happened, the other young man was stumbling along 400 yards of a reeking, fetid Dallas sewer pipe to emerge from this culvert. And he was not Lee Harvey Oswald, or Roscoe White, or J.D. Tippit, nor even a Cuban or Russian communist. His name was Jack Allen Lawrence. And we know that after stumbling up this bank, he turned up 15 minutes later at the Lincoln Mercury car showroom, where he'd obtained a job with false references, pale, sweating, and, on a hot, sunny day in Dallas, covered in mud, telling his co-workers Albert Bogard and Robert Tater He had been ill that morning. He stumbled into the men's room and threw up, while they, feeling his behaviour was suspicious, called the police, who made a record of the entire incident. Back at the plaza, the guilt of the radio men coordinating the gunfire can be seen from their behaviour. These two, Orlando Bosch and the Umbrella Man, have a seat, while everyone else runs around them. Bosch makes a report that the hit was successful, then casually walks away, just like the chief radio coordinator, Jim Hicks, with the radios clearly visible in their back pockets. A few yards away, the CIA's clean-up squad have begun working to remove all evidence useful to a forensic team. Deputy Sheriff Buddy Walters is here seen finding the bullet which struck in the grass near the manhole cover. He hands it on to one of the fake FBI men, who pockets it. While this is going on, Rogers, Harrelson, and E. Howard Hunt are discovered hiding in the boxcars of the train which they hoped would be their getaway vehicle, until it's prevented from moving by railway dispatcher and key witness Lee Bowers. They are photographed repeatedly as they are marched to the Dallas courthouse, and we can clearly see in this picture the radio receiver Hunt is wearing in his right ear, which is identical to the receivers worn by those Dallas police officers who were part of the plot. As they walk, they are overseen by Colonel Ed Lansdale, who secures their release and begins to give the press the cover story that this man is the major suspect, and that acting alone he shot the president from behind. The truth, as we now know, is that 8 separate snipers, firing 16 shots in 4 separate stages, had tried to make certain of killing the president by hitting him in the head and had failed abysmally. The shooting on the day had been nothing to write home about. A third of all the shots had missed the car completely. Had it not been for the ruse of bribing the driver to brake at a point painted on the curbside, which is still visible, so that Jack Lawrence could shoot Kennedy in the head from just 15 feet away, the president might have survived. So now we must address the question, why does the Zapruder film not show this very obvious setup of the limousine stopping for the headshot? The answer, of course, is that it has been tampered with. In the 1960s, Hollywood special effects teams had developed techniques for masking off segments of film frames to disguise the true movement of figures within the picture. In the Zapruder film, frames have been removed in order to fake a continuous flowing motion, so that we don't see the very obvious setup which dozens of witnesses reported. If you look now at the top of the frame, the doctrine of the film becomes perfectly obvious in the way in which the figures are blurred, and yet the shadows are sharp, which is impossible. This CIA tampering with the evidence becomes even clearer when the Zapruder film is run next to the Orville Nix film taken from the other side. It's easy to see from the way the motorcycles suddenly close on the limousine that it stops completely. And we can see that frames have also been removed from the Nix film by the way in which Agent Clint Hill appears to move sideways while running forwards, before leaping on the car. As the mad dash to Parkland Hospital begins, the chief coordinator in the assassination plot, George Herbert Walker Bush, casually relaxes, with hands in his pockets, at the entrance of the school book depository. Now this is going to be one of those all too familiar Kennedy assassination moments in which people will say, well, yes, it could be him, but how can we be sure? Because we've seen this kind of thing before with Badgeman. However, a gentleman who I think must be a police detective has posted a YouTube video in which he utilizes the latest forensic techniques for identifying murder suspects by making a comparison between the photo taken in Dealey Plaza and one of George Bush in conversation with Richard Nixon during Watergate. This man points out that this person has exactly the same skull shape, exactly the same hairline, chin, and nose as George Bush. He is also wearing the same type of suit, white shirt, and exactly the same type of tie. he is exactly the same height, the same weight, is wearing clothing which matches down to his shoes, but, most importantly, he has a characteristic mannerism of cocking his right wrist when he puts his hands in his pockets. We know from this declassified FBI memo that George Bush was in Dallas, staying at the Sheraton on November 22nd. So can there be any doubt about this person's identity? Surrounded by the corrupt policemen he was coordinating, Bush knew already that if an honest officer should happen to catch one of the assassins, it would, because of what Mark Lane rightly calls plausible deniability, make no difference. Because what would they find? Mafia hoods with prison records as long as their arms? Or contract killers like Charles Harrelson? They certainly wouldn't have found anyone who carried CIA credentials or anyone whose involvement with the government could be traced. But even while he smiled and chatted to his fellow killers, Bush was unaware that the plotters had just made their first big mistake. They knew that they had to forensically control the body from the moment the shots were fired, and the moment Kennedy entered Trauma Room 1, that control had to be relinquished. Although they had CIA agents placed in the emergency unit, these people were not aware of the throat wound, which could hardly be seen because it was so tiny. It was at this moment that all the Dallas doctors and nurses like Aubrey Bell made a mental note of this very obvious sign of a frontal entry shot. One of the Dallas medical team, Dr. Charles Crenshaw, a junior doctor at that time, vividly recalls what the first professionals in the Kennedy killing had to deal with.
The second wound was here in the throat, right above the necktie. It was a small opening, very small, 3 to 5 millimeters, about the size of your little finger. I looked at the wound again. I wanted to know and remember this the rest of my life. And the rest of my life I will always know he was shot from the front.
And also described the portion missing from the rear of Kennedy's head after the impact of the frangible bullet, which hit him in the right temple.
The bullet struck about where and passed about where?
From here to
taking out
the back or the occipital part, the back of your head. This was gone.
It's approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died, gunshot wound.
This information soon made its way to the media. This is why, at the very first press conference, Press Secretary Malcolm Kilduff correctly described the cause of death and direction of the shot. In order to find a means with which to contradict this evidence, the cover-up now began in earnest, with the summoning from the Westland Funeral Home of a CIA agent who was known for being the best in the business at reconstructive surgery on cadavers, John Melvin Liggett. This man was actually attending a funeral when he was told of the president's assassination and asked to go to Parkland by the coroner. What he didn't know as he drove away was that one of his clients in this macabre and gruesome story was at that moment still alive. When he was arrested years later by New York police detective Jim Rothstein, Frank Sturgis, on discovering that Rothstein was a Bay of Pigs veteran like himself, got into an old army buddy's conversation with him and said first of all that after the assassination he returned to the Miami safe house where he ridiculed Marita Lorenz for missing history. It was all perfectly safe, he told her. No cops, no newspaper investigation. Everything was covered.
I asked Sturgis, Jesus Christ, Frank, did you shoot the president? Did you have something to do with that? He said, who gives a shit? Yeah, who's going to prove it? He said, we kill a lot of people. What the hell's the difference?
Sturgis then went on to say that Dallas police officer J.D. Tibbett was actually gunned down by the radio talk show host G. Gordon Liddy, who was at that time a CIA agent working with E. Howard Hunt. And here we must address a question which puzzled assassination researchers for years. Why did a Dallas policeman have to die within a few minutes of President Kennedy? What possible function could he have played in the overall plot as a corpse? One would think the authorities could have caught the fleeing Patsy without any need to incriminate him any further. So why did the life of J.D. Tippit also have to end on the 22nd of November 1963? Where did he fit in? In only the last few years, a wonderful investigator called Robert D. Morningstar discovered one tiny little fact about Jefferson Davis Tippit, which became the most important single piece in the completion of this puzzle. Because Officer Tippit had a nickname. When he was at work, his fellow officers always used to call him JFK, because at 39 years of age he looked exactly like him. In the only well-known picture of Tippit, his Elvis haircut makes him appear very youthful, but having turned grey and having nearly turned 40, most people felt his resemblance to Kennedy was uncanny. What Tippit never knew, as he drove past assassination witnesses Jack Tatum, Domingo Benavides, and Aquila Clemens, was that he had been selected to play the role of the president in death. Researchers have always believed it couldn't be a coincidence that Tippit was shot in the right temple, just like JFK some 45 minutes earlier. They wondered why bullets had been removed from his body in the ambulance, and why, when he was pronounced dead on arrival at the Methodist Hospital, it was felt necessary to move his body to Parkland. With their concentration firmly fixed on the casket of the deceased president, the newsmen completely ignored the ambulance which spirited away the body of J.D. Tippit, so that it could be loaded onto Air Force 2, where John Melvin Liggett was waiting. When Kennedy's casket arrived at Love Field a few minutes later, Clint Hill, the agent who jumped on the car, recalled that all the people aboard Air Force 1 were told they had to go forward to witness the swearing-in of Lyndon Baines Johnson. This, of course, was just a ruse, to get Jackie Kennedy to leave her husband's body, and the moment she was out of the way, his cadaver was stolen and placed aboard Air Force 2 next to the cadaver of J.D. Tippit. Many people have seen this famous picture, in which LBJ is smiling at Congressman Albert Thomas, a moment after becoming president, and he is winking back. We haven't known until now just how huge and terrible a secret he was sharing with Johnson, because at that moment on the plane right alongside, the most highly qualified specialist in reconstructive surgery and embalming in the country, John Melvin Liggett, was starting to make a facsimile of the dead president, using the body of J.D. Tippit in order to obscure the true extent of the damage to Kennedy's head and make it seem consistent with a shot from behind. But Liggett realized immediately this was well nigh impossible, because having been told over the radio about the head shot, Liddy took it upon himself to try and ape this damage by firing into Tippit's torso and then, when he was down, firing into his right temple, instead of into the back of the head as he'd been instructed. This was a second huge mistake. The human brain has a consistency like play school plasticine. Fire a bullet through it, and it is very easy for a skilled pathologist to track the bullet's path at autopsy. What Liggett wanted to show to any investigators was a brain that looked like this. What he had was one brain which looked like this, and another which looked like this. A large portion of Kennedy's brain had been ripped out by the impact of the explosive or frangible bullet, and what remained was filled with tiny shards of lead, some of them microscopic, which might take all night to locate. Liggett was terrified. The plotters had asked him to play Dr. Frankenstein at 30,000 feet. Yet with all his embalming experience, he instantly realized a botched job was the best he could possibly deliver. In his panic, he sawed off Tippit's skull and simply ripped out the entire brain to at least make sure no one could track the bullet which, after Liddy's error, had so obviously come from the wrong direction. He then compounded Liddy's error by making a large hole in the rear of the head to ape the damage to Kennedy's head. With this done, he rebuilt the skull, hurriedly sewed the scalp back together, and then set about the gruesome task of trying to make the cadaver of J.D. Tippit more closely resemble the cadaver of John F. Kennedy. By shaving eyebrows, bringing forward Tippett's slightly more receding hairline, filling in missing segments of both heads with plaster of Paris, and rebuilding portions of the flesh with wax. Liggett performed this ghoulish service while the aircraft he was on, Air Force 2, went through the usual procedure of leapfrogging Air Force 1 to arrive at Andrews Air Force Base slightly earlier. He wasn't given long enough, and in the rush to get finished, the plotters now made their third and most stupid mistake. Instead of placing Tippett's body in a casket identical to the one aboard Air Force 1, they placed him in a Spartan grey metal coffin inside a body bag. As the TV media showed these distressing pictures to a world reeling in shock, it's hardly surprising that no one ever dreamed this casket could be empty, but it was. As it was driven away, out of sight of the media, the two bodies were taken from Air Force 2 and loaded onto a helicopter. It was at this point that the two honest men, FBI agents Francis X. O'Neill and his partner, William Siebert, became crucial figures in the story. They explained to researcher David Lifton that they made the journey to the Naval Hospital at Bethesda in the car behind the hearse which carried Jackie and Bobby, and most notably Admiral George Berkeley, who made sure he stayed with the empty coffin by sitting on another man's lap. Upon reaching Bethesda, Siebert and O'Neill said Berkeley then guided the family members into the building while the hearse was ordered to the rear to unload.
Okay, you're going to have to break it off, but come back tomorrow. I'm going to finish this up tomorrow on the Investigative Journal. Have a good evening and see you tomorrow.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy.
Since the beginning of time, kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity. Invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host Melody Cedarstrom right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free 1-800-375-4188.